Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller. Today I'm joined by an awesome progressive fighter, a civil rights activist, a social justice activist, leader, legendary, been around for a long time on the front lines of a lot of fights. It's a real honor to welcome Carl Dix. How you doing, Carl?
I'm doing fine, Eric, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. You're representing Refuse Fascism, among other things today. That's kind of what we're going to focus on. I've had several guests on from that organization. You guys are really on the front lines to turning back or preventing, the further creep of fascism from the Trump Pence regime. Just to not mince words. And there's a big national day of action kicking off this Saturday. I want to talk about that, which will be ongoing. We'll get into all that, but obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by talking about last night's debate and what your thoughts on it were. What did you think of, Trump's performance last night in the debate? I'm sure it was chilling.
Well, what I have to say about his performance was that he made clear that he is not running a normal election trying to get elected to be president. Donald Trump is running for Führer. That's all I can say about it. I mean, he comes out there, big lie after big lie, bullying the person he's debating against, the moderator. And then you get to the content of what he was doing, and he's basically laying out this election is rigged unless I win, and I will refuse to accept the results of a rigged election. And then he gets into a couple things about his plan. One of them is that he has called on his people to go down to the polls to watch the polls. And poll watching is code for intimidating Black and brown people out of voting. Only they're probably going to extend it beyond Black and brown people, but that's the history of poll watching in this country. And it's not anything different with the Trump-Pence regime. They are sending people down to intimidate voters. I mean, they've already started it. When they started early voting in Virginia, voters had to make their way around a line of Trump supporters that were there blocking the entrance, and people had to go around them. This is what the man is doing. And then when asked, would he disavow white supremacy, and particularly would he ask the Proud Boys to stand down, he asked them to stand back and stand by.
Right.
In other words, be ready, be on alert. They understood it very clearly, and they had that out as a meme before the debate was over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he would not disavow violence and that kind of stuff on the part of his supporters, which is a real cornerstone of his plan. He has these people, they are being unleashed to intimidate people, to attack protesters, and they have even killed protesters. And that is fine. That is within the bounds of his law and order. That lawlessness is within the bounds of his law and order. What is outside of the bounds of that is people protesting against the police murdering Black people. For him, that is not law and order. That needs to be stopped. And he welcomes the role of these people. You basically have a regime that is announcing we are going to cling to power by hook or by crook. And there's a lot of by crook in it. And then you have to say, well, what are we going to do about that? And another thing that to me was telling about this debate, Joe Biden kind of was not up to the task. And it does pose to you And look, I say that as somebody who is going to vote in a presidential election for the first time in my life.
Mm.
And I'm 72 years old, so I had a lot of chances. This is the first time that I have decided it matters and I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. But I really got the sense that this guy is not leading a fight against Trump the way it needs to be led. And that underscores the necessity for what Refuse Fascism is taking up, calling people into the streets, not saying if they do something bad in November, then we should take to the streets, because that's too late. They're already doing something bad. They're already subverting the election. They're already stealing the election. We can't give them another 30 some days to work their foul deeds to try to ensure Trump being in position to have another. We have to take to the streets now. We have to bring others into the streets with one demand: Trump, Pence out now. And when I say one demand, I don't mean people need to drop their struggles. Bring your struggles. If your motivation is Black Lives Matter and end white supremacy, bring that, because that links right up with Trump, Pence out now. Because you're not going to advance the struggle to end white supremacy while a white supremacist is consolidating his hold on power, calling out his white supremacist unofficial forces, as well as unleashing the official forces to beat down the protests of people around Black Lives Matter. You're not going to advance the struggle to stop the devastation of the environment and reverse it by allowing a science denying guy who has been tearing up anything that stood in the way of, pillaging the environment. So, and the same thing, if what motivates you is the rights of LGBTQ people, a woman's right to abortion, stopping the attacks on immigrants, all of that comes together in the need, it links up with the need to stop this fascist regime and to drive it out. And it will take, ultimately, it's going to take millions of people in the streets. And we're going to start that process this Saturday, October 3rd, with protests all across the country.
Yeah.
I understand you're outside Philly. Well, they're going to be out there in Philadelphia. I'm going to be up here in New York. We're going into Union Square at 2 p.m. And you can go to the website, Refuse Fascism is the website to go to. You could also go to the website, revcom.us. I like that website too. I'm also a representative for the Revolutionary Communist Party. That's our website. And it has all the information on what Refuse Fascism is doing, because we understand this is a very necessary step, stopping this regime from consolidating its power.
Here, here. Yeah, I will pull up the website. There's a lot I want to ask you about and what you just said right there.
Sure.
The previous guests I've had on from Refuse Fascism, one of the things that I'm always asking is, how do you get people off the sidelines, right? And the way Donald Trump handles questions like that, denouncing white supremacy last night, right? Like, you and I know clearly it's a dog whistle, right? He could have chose. You said his words were stand. What did he say? Stand.
What he said was
stand
back and stand by.
Right, and I think, I mean, he's an idiot, right? But in his mind, he has that fraction of a second where instead of saying stand down, which is the right objective answer, he calculates it in that or it's just so instinctive that he says stand back and stand by, which is a dog whistle, right? But get through a lifetime of doing that kind of BS, like he knows how to have just a bit of wiggle room with plausible deniability for the people that is ringing at least partially true for. Does that make sense? And how do you overcome that when you talk to somebody like you and I clearly know, and people that are going to be out in the streets on the 3rd clearly know? But I imagine if there's someone that just half pays attention, they might say, oh, well, he said sure, and he said stand back, right? how do we get them to say, no, that is exactly what he's doing? It's a dog whistle. How do you engage, animate, enlighten those people?
Well, I mean, the main part of it is we have to get people to recognize the reality. And actually, with this standby thing, a lot of people recognize that. I mean, even mainline Democrats recognized, oh, he's telling them to be on alert. Now, they're not calling people to act now. They're saying that's more reason you should vote for us. And really, people should vote for Biden. Didn't just say that in a pro forma way. I am actually going to do that. Very first time in my life. But the thing that this makes clear to me is that when he says that to his people, and they knew it instantly. I mean, I wasn't kidding. They had a meme of stand back and stand by that they were spreading on social media before the debate was over.
Yeah, they had merch for sale. They had merch for sale within the hour, right? Yep.
Yeah. That's how clear they were that this was a call, a shout out to them to be ready. We have to get people to confront that for what it actually is. Not that this is, Biden called him a fool, a clown, this kind of stuff. And there's clownish stuff to what he does, but there's also a calculation. I mean, they have a plan. He is actually rallying people to go to the polling places, to be a force that's intimidating people. They are actually working to rush another Christian fascist onto the Supreme Court. His pick, Judge Barrett, has already said, I'm not going to recuse myself. So if he gets the election to the Supreme Court, he's lining up his votes. He's already scheming on a thing of getting it into Congress if nobody gets the electoral vote thing, and figuring out how he can win in Congress, where it's not going to be based on how many representatives you have, but each state gets one vote. And can he get enough states to ignore how the voters voted and put him back in? So he has got his plan and he's moving on it. And we got to get people to recognize that this is what's going down and what it will mean. Because when we talk about fascism, that is not a cuss word that we're using against somebody we don't like.
Right.
This is actually a description of the kind of society that this guy wants to run. It's a different form of rule. See, because some leftists, when they talk about fascism, they're really talking about repression, which happens under capitalism. This capitalist imperialist system has used repression from the very beginning. And I know this, I first noticed it in the 1960s. Someone who I really looked up to, George Jackson, a prisoner in California who just went in, got a life sentence for taking $70 from a gas station, became a revolutionary in prison, and really influenced a lot of people. And I refused to go to Vietnam in 1970. So I was in prison when his prison writings were coming out. I was really influenced by him. But one thing that he did is he said, fascism is already here. And I looked into that and I said, no, wait a minute. This isn't fascism. It's not nice.
Right.
Capitalist imperialist system is not a nice place to live for people who are being exploited and oppressed, but it's different from fascism. And where the difference comes in is you can protest, you can hold open public meetings, you can go into court and file suits. There's different rights that you have that you can use to build opposition to the things that the system is doing to people. You go into a fascist situation, that gets closed down. Right. And when the attorney general starts telling you he's looking into bringing sedition charges against Black Lives Matter protesters and against the mayor of Seattle, because she's not being hard enough on the protesters. They are telling you they are looking to shift this, and it will become a different thing. And look, as a revolutionary, I'm not going to give up fighting against this system if Trump gets back in and if he closes this down, but it becomes much, much harder. And I mean, there's an analogy that I use for people of saying, well, let's just suppose we were in Nazi Germany. Germany was a place where there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment before the Nazis came to power. In fact, that was something that they used to come to power and to bring together a different form of rule there by demonizing and criminalizing Jewish people. But before Hitler had consolidated power, you had problems being a Jew, but if you were abused by the government, you could take a case into court.
Right.
And they would listen to it. But once Kristallnacht had gone down, once Hitler had consolidated power, elections were no longer happening. A Jewish person who went into court in the early 1940s and said, this government is abusing the rights of Jewish people, and I want to file a lawsuit against it. The judge would not have said, oh, this is serious. Let me see your evidence. Bring in your witnesses. We have to hold hearings over this. Right. They would say, when is the next train to the camps coming? Right. Get that person on it right away. This is what we could be up against. And it's not just that more horrific right-wing policies will happen, although that will happen too. But it really does come down to a whole different form of rule where basic rights have been stripped away. I mean, I also refer to it as the Trump-Pence regime is feverishly working to hammer the final fascist nails into the coffin of basic rights in this country. And we have to act now to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not hyperbolic, right? You know, a lot of people that, you know, sort of half pay attention. Like I say, I keep focusing on getting people off the sidelines, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure you heard it, you know, in 2016. Well, you don't think Trump's going to be another Hitler, do you? Well, it doesn't start with, you know, the trains to the, you know, concentration camps. It starts with demonizing, dehumanizing others, right? You know, mm-hmm. Division, you know, I wonder how, you know, if they're how critical that is to, you know, sort of the evolution of fascism taking hold, otherizing, right? I imagine that's, you know, nationalism and racism and jingoism and all that stuff plays a critical role in the rise of that. Almost without it, you couldn't have that, right? And when I was talking to Jamil earlier, we were talking about the Reichstag fire in Germany, where that was an inciting incident, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, we've had through the summer of 2020, we had, you know, George Floyd. That might be the incident, but we've had kind of a slow burn over the summer rather than a singular incident. So from the cynical perspective, from the fascist side, right, that you know, that further entrenches them over this summer versus the singular Reichstag fire type of incident, right? Is that a fair assessment that is, you know, animating or solidifying, you know, the Trump deplorables, the sycophants, the enablers? Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, what we have is we got a rolling fascist coup, not mm-hmm. one that's going to happen necessarily. One thing happens and then all of a sudden everything gets thrown into place. But look at the way they've been moving. I mean, he's been delegitimizing the election for a few months now.
Yeah.
Mail-in ballots, the biggest fraud that ever happened.
Right.
He's been talking about the Democratic mayors and governors. They're the problem around the coronavirus. They're the problem around law and order. He's been scaring up this thing about the violence of the protesters. Violence is taking over the cities, when actually studies have revealed 93% of the protests have been nonviolent. And then when you talk about that other 7%, there's a question of who was creating the violence. The police were responsible for some of it. Trump supporters were responsible for some of it. So you really have a small problem in relation to violence on the side of protesters in this. And look, the thing that I really think we need to realize is that this has a direction. It is going somewhere unless we stop it. And that's the main thing that I think we need to bring out to people. The other thing that's important in relation to that is that there is a way to stop it, because a lot of people are talking about how scared they are now.
Yeah.
And even more are talking about, some of them cite the debate. Because of the way Trump performed on the debate stage, people are talking about their fear, and there is something to be afraid of, but that fear should motivate them to get off the sidelines, get into the game. And part of it does include bringing out that there is a game plan to win this. And it does relate to not waiting till November, not scenarioizing Trump could do this, he could do that, he could do the other, but looking at what he's actually doing and seeing that you can't leave the momentum to the Proud Boys, the Second Amendment people, to all of Trump's official and unofficial thugs that he wields. We have to get into the streets in mass, nonviolent protest, be creative with it, but also be determined with it, and bring others out, because it won't start with everybody. There's actually a lot of people who feel a lot of the things that we're talking about, but they don't know what to do about it. Right. And they're being told, vote, get others to vote. And they should vote. I'm not at all saying don't do that, but don't just do that. Because when somebody's telling you, I don't care how the vote comes out, I got a plan for how I'm going to snatch this thing, then you don't just vote and wait and see whether they snatch it. Yeah. You begin to act now to create conditions where they can't snatch it. And a part of that is manifesting the widespread hatred, disgust, and opposition for everything that this regime stands for, not just in one event at the ballot box, but daily in the streets. And that's what we're going to launch off on October 3rd with bringing people together around the demand, Trump, Pence out now. We're going to continue that day by day. We're going to be going at it in different ways. Right on. Bringing out, say, on a particular day, this is going to be a day that focuses on LGBTQ issues. On another day, we might focus on Black Lives Matter. And see, when I say that, I don't mean on LGBTQ Day, then only LGBTQ people come out. Everybody who hates this regime needs to come out. And if you need to learn about why LGBTQ people have such problems with this regime, then come out and learn that. If you need to learn about why Black Lives Matter is motivation for driving this regime out, then come out and learn that, but stand together, bring our struggles together. We shouldn't go off into our own corner and waging a fight around our issues, because our issues are tied together in whether or not this regime is able to go forward with its plan, which will smash every progressive program and agenda that you've got, whether it's the environment, whether it is what's happening to Black people, what's happening to the indigenous people, the attacks on women and their rights to choose to have an abortion, and even access to birth control. That's how serious this is. They're actually moving towards, how can we make access to birth control illegal? This is what these people have in mind. And I'm not making this up. People really need to look under the covers of what they're doing. And more they're laying it right out front.
Yeah, it's not subtle. It's not subtle. And yeah, divided we fall. I like that point about sort of cross pollination among these issues because they affect us all, right? You said about being scared. There was a powerful moment. AOC did an Instagram live the evening RBG died. Sorry for the acronyms, but she said, "Turn your fear into fuel. Turn your fear into focus." Right, and that's what we're all sort of required to do in this moment. I wanted to pull up the website, what you're talking about, the events. It's refusefascism.org, and it's right on the homepage. Let me highlight that you can donate here, of course, but maybe more than that, and the urgency. October 3rd, we begin. So go to refusefascism.org. Trump Pence out now is the hashtag. There are flyers you can print. There are, hand palm cards that you can print and hand out. You can here find a sponsor or find a protest in your area or sponsor one. I'm going to click on that and it'll pull up the cities. It goes to another page. There's events on Facebook. So these are the cities that are already sort of identified: New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, Boston, Cleveland, Detroit, Honolulu, Houston, Kansas City, Philly, San Francisco, Seattle, St. Louis, and Washington, D.C. And you can sign up for any one of these. There's Facebook events. You can share them. It's got the time and place. If there isn't a city on here, create your own.
Create one.
Yeah, be that catalyst and create it. And no town is small enough, right? This affects us all, right? This, Carl's not being hyperbolic. This is literally our country is on the line. So, find an event near you, sign up, bring a friend, bring two friends. If you're scared, like I said, turn that fear into fuel, turn that fear into focus, and get out in the streets. And again, it's refusefascism.org. Sign up, go to an event. I'll mention that again before we go, but I just wanted to pull that up and highlight that. Let me ask you a little bit about, obviously you've made the point multiple times about voting on November 3rd. That is absolutely critical, right? And that, again, that's a national effort. And, you have to get informed and vote on down ballot candidates, which I've been interviewing for months now. So any one of those, right? But can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned it at the beginning, how Joe Biden is a little lackluster in the fight, right? Like he's campaigning as if it's the 1990s and it's a regular campaign. But, the critical nature and the unique threat of the Trump-Pence regime is something that needs to be risen against, right? We can't just sort of rely on corporately owned Democratic leadership to, get us out of this. Can you talk about, maybe the shortcomings of Democratic leadership and how we have to fill in those gaps or overcome that, or at least not be complacent just to rely on them?
Yeah, because see, look, the Democratic Party is one of the two parties that represent this system. Okay, now they have programmatic differences with the Republicans, which have been greatly sharpened by the escalation of this fascist program. So they have their own reasons for opposing the regime, but they're doing it as a ruling class party. And one thing that they're not doing is they are not energizing their base. And their base are people who have a lot of contradictions with the system, which is part of why they're not energizing their base, because they don't want to have an unleashed populace that is coming forward around, we got to end white supremacy. We got to stop the devastation of the environment and reverse it. We've got to ensure that the rights of women to control their reproductive functions are going to be upheld. They don't want that populace energized, because then you won't be able to get them back, the genie back in the bottle, and to go along with the system. They'll want to go forward. And frankly, as a revolutionary, I want them to go forward, and I'm going to be working on helping to lead them go that way. And there's a very important series of articles by Bob Avakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, which goes very deeply into this. There's three parts to it. The overall title is "Voting Will Not Be Enough."
Right.
We must take to the streets and stay in the streets, raising the demand. Trump, Pence out now. And he goes pretty deeply into why, as a party that's a representative of the capitalist imperialist system, the Democratic Party is not wanting to lead a movement that unleashes people, but want more one that keeps them in support of the Democratic Party, but also in a way that they can be kept within the channels of this system. And what's needed right now is getting out of those channels, because the way the system usually works is you vote for your candidate, the votes are tallied up. There are things like voter suppression that target Black people, that target immigrants and things like that. And that's been going on for a while. But basically, you function within that. And that's how this gets decided. Well, this is one where one side is saying, we've got our Second Amendment people. We're going to have them out there at the polling places. We lose the election. We're not going anywhere. We got ways to mess this up and plans to cling to power by hook or by crook. Well, the way you deal with that is not, well, we're going to abide by all the rules and the norms of how this goes, even as you're saying you're busting through those norms. No, you have to say, all right, what we have is we have tens of millions of people who don't like what this thing represents. And if we unleash them, we can begin to take the initiatives away from the fascist forces that are out there. These Proud Boys have been out there mobilizing. They've been going into places like Portland, shooting paintballs and mace and this kind of stuff at people, and even shooting some live rounds at people. They've been doing that. They murdered some people up in Kenosha.
Yeah.
You know, we should recognize that. And look, I understand why people are scared, because there's something to be afraid of. But you have to recognize that if our fear paralyzes ourselves, then what we're afraid of will actually come down, and it will be even worse than the threats of that happening, because it will actually happen. And this is, again, Trump, you can say a lot of things about him, but he will actually do this, the things that he's threatening, if he's allowed. And we have to say, no, we're not going to allow it. And tens of millions of people in the street creates the kind of political crisis in the society that can get some people who are in positions of authority to do some things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Right. You know, because some of the Democratic Party leaders have said things like the military and the Secret Service won't allow him to do this. Well, I'm not sure they won't, because when he went across the Lafayette Park to get his photo op holding up the Bible in front of the church and had the peaceful protesters dispersed with pepper spray and police beating them with shields and stuff like that, he took some military people with him.
Yeah.
Now, they later, one of them later apologized for having done it, but he didn't say to Trump beforehand, I'm not going, this isn't right. He didn't try to stop it beforehand. It was only afterward he saw how bad it looked, and it was like, I'm sorry I did that. So we have to actually become a factor in this, and not just by lining up at the voting booth or mailing in our ballots, which we should do that again. I'm not undercutting that. But the way we become a factor in the game is to be in the streets. The way people in Puerto Rico drove out a governor by going into the streets and staying in the streets. And yeah, there's risk involved in that, because when the people in Puerto Rico went out the first, I think it's by the second night, the governor brought down his repressive apparatus and dispersed the protest. And then they came back, and they came back again, and others began to join them.
Yeah.
That's what we got to do. We got to get out there. with this demand, Trump, Pence out now. We have to begin to bring together people from the different struggles. We have to reach out more broadly and let others know that this is happening and what it's about. Point them to the horrors that Donald Trump is perpetrating, but also point them to this is the way to deal with it, not sit back and wait and hope somehow it doesn't really happen.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you talk about that incident, the photo op at the church, right? And you said, he did have, I forget who it was, a general or somebody with him, right? And they apologized for it after the fact, right? That's all fine and good, but they didn't prevent it, right? It's akin to any one of these police violence, murders or whatever we see, where they just excuse it. It was a bad apple, right? We never see good apples preventing it, right? So if we're going to rely on good apples to prevent it, we should have learned that lesson by now, right?
No, that's a very good point, because they keep saying, oh, it's a few bad apples. But yeah, I remember the thing up in Rochester where one cop pushes an old guy down. The guy hits his head. He's bleeding from his ears.
Horrific.
One cop did that, but there were dozens of cops there, and they all just marched right over the guy.
Yeah, I counted.
They're bleeding on the ground. Those other cops who didn't push him down, they were not good cops.
Right, exactly. I think I counted like 8 stepped over him. I think it was 8. I paused it, and I think it was 8 that just stepped over him and did nothing, right? Yeah, so those good apples never seem to show up when those bad apples are doing their business, right? So if we're relying on that with the military and Secret Service, like you said, it's already going to be too late, right? Let me ask you. So this is a fight you've been in your whole life, right? In some form or fashion, and it's escalated. Like it was last night at primetime TV. The president of the United States calling on white supremacists to stand by, right? And they took it loud and clear as orders. Like that's never happened. Like that's the height of everything you're fighting against, right? So, just kind of on a personal front, like how, this whole term of his has been just exhausting. And, how do you overcome fatigue? How do you remain hopeful? How do you wake up the next day and say, F these guys, I'm fighting this fight? Like, how do you, find the motivation and what gives you hope to keep pressing on? Because that's a critical thing. We all have to keep that fire ignited. How do you do that?
Well, it's a combination of two things. The first thing is, and it goes all the way back to the beginning, because when I refused to go to Vietnam back in 1970, I was like, I didn't want to go to Vietnam before I decided I had to refuse, because it's very inconvenient to be shot at and shot. But what really motivated me to refuse to go to Vietnam is that I did not want to become the kind of person who was part of a war trying to drown the legitimate liberation struggle of an oppressed people in blood. I did not want to become that kind of person. And I got sent to Leavenworth Military Penitentiary for doing that. I did 2 years there. And I got out looking for the revolution because I did some organizing in the prison, which got me spending most of my time in solitary confinement. I had a lot of time to do some reading and that kind of stuff. And I got a sense of these problems that I didn't like and felt should be changed, like wars in Vietnam, like what was happening to Black people and other things, actually stem from the nature of this system. And that for humanity to have the kind of future that it needed to have, we have to get rid of this system. And see, that's one part of what has motivated me over the 50 years, is that this was about what humanity needed. Right. This was not just, well, what do I get out of this? How do I get the best for me? Because if it was just about that, you can find some other way to go for that. But if you really zero in on, well, what does humanity need? Humanity needs revolution. We got to get rid of this system. And that's one part of it. The other part of it, frankly, is the leadership of Bob Avakian, leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party. See, and this is a guy, and I've known him for more than 45 years. And I happened to meet him at a time when I actually had a lot of political disagreements with him. And we fell into a spot. We were both staying at the same place one night. And he asked, do I want to talk about our differences? And I said, sure. And we started arguing, and we argued for a couple hours. And he kept saying, well, let's look at this from the perspective of where we're trying to get to, which I first took as, well, that's just a rhetorical device to whatever. Right. But then I realized he actually meant it. Where are we trying to get to? So then we talked about it. Where were we trying to get to? And we're actually trying to get to the same place. And our differences were only over how to get there. We zeroed in on those, talked about that, and the sun had come up. We started the night before the sun had come up.
Right.
And it struck me that what got us there was the way in which he was looking at things from the perspective of the future we needed to bring. And that's been the hallmark of his leadership. And in some of the darkest times, because as a revolutionary communist, it was a very dark time for us when Mao Zedong died. The people who worked with him were arrested. His enemies took over China, and China went from trying to develop socialism to becoming, frankly, an imperialist country rivaling the US. They still call it socialism and communism, but that's not what it is. Right. You know, they've got their own sweatshops. They're bullying other countries, this kind of stuff. That was a pretty dark time. But Avakian's leadership actually pointed to, well, here was the problem that this revolution ran into. Here were some of the shortcomings in it. And here's where, at a point of a test of strength, the revolutionary forces couldn't prevail. Right. That kind of leadership has helped bring us through it, and has brought us up to the part where Avakian has brought forward what we call the new communism. He's the architect of that. And people really need to go to the website revcom.us and check out the work of Bob Avakian. I've mentioned an article that he did around the Trump-Pence regime. He's done a lot of work on that. But also, if you want to see an end to all of these horrors, check out Avakian's work on that front. Check out the new communism. Check out some of the things that he's done on that front. It would take me too long to try to get into all of that. But it's that combination of things. Right. What does humanity need is the motivation and the inspiration, and the hope is that on a solid scientific foundation, I can see the potential for actually building a movement for an actual revolution in this country based upon the new communism that Avakian has forged. And I can see what that would mean for humanity. Right. If we're able to actually get this movement going. And it's what we were working on when Trump took office. And we saw that, okay, we're not going to stop doing that because revolution is still needed, but we do have to adjust it. Because if we don't stop this fascist, and we formed Refuse Fascism in December of 2016, right, because this is exactly where we thought this was headed. We didn't know that it would take this exact direction because we ain't got no crystal ball, but we know it was going in this direction. And we figured we better get together with everybody else who doesn't want to see this happen. Yeah. And build a movement that can stop it. And, you know, it's kind of hard because you got a lot of people who hate what Trump and Pence are doing, but they're still willing to work on it through the channels of the system. And maybe the midterm will reverse this. Maybe the Mueller report will expose this. Maybe impeachment will stop him. People are trying all of these things, and it hasn't worked yet. And now people are like, the election will stop it. Right. And the problem is he's actually telling you already, I'm not going to allow votes to stop me. What you going to do about that? And we have to say, oh, you're not going to allow votes to stop you? Well, then we better do something else in addition to voting. You know, and voting will be a part of it, because if there's a landslide against Trump, and there's millions of people in the streets, you can create a situation where some of the people who have been disposed to not have enough backbone to take this on may develop a little backbone, may see a need to step in,
Right.
you know, because Chuck D from Public Enemy talks about Nixonizing Trump. And one of the things that happens with Nixon, and the reason I bring that up, is that Barry Goldwater, who was himself a reactionary right-wing politician, was the one who actually went in and told Nixon, hey, man, you got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Because our whole setup is being called into question. So in the interest of our setup not going down, you got to get out of here. Now, how it will go down with Trump, I don't know, because Nixon at least had some more allegiance to the whole setup. I don't know exactly how Trump would look at it if somebody told him the whole setup is getting shaky, because he might look at it like, I actually care more about myself than the whole system.
Yeah, and anyone that's challenged him heretofore and anything like that, they're just ousted. He just boots them, right? He's surrounded himself by yes men only, right? So there's who would even be that person to come in and deliver that news? They're all sycophantic, right?
But we have to bring that factor of millions of people in the street,
right?
And that changes the game.
Yeah. Well, I talk to you all day, sir. I enjoy listening to you. Just to highlight the actions again this weekend, October 3rd, kicking off this weekend. Let me pull up the website just one more time. It's refusefascism.org. Go find an event in a city near you. Make a little commute if you have to. If there isn't one near you, create one.
Create one. Start one.
Right? And by all means, you can donate here. Go like this page. Go follow Refuse Fascism's socials. Follow Carl on Twitter. Let's get this movement, growing. It's like you say so eloquently. I'm going to bastardize it in the summary, but we can't just wait on the election. We can't just sort of sit by and hope that everyone's a good faith actor on November 3rd when they're outright telling us they're not good faith actors, right?
Exactly.
Everyone always says that Oprah quote, when someone tells you who they are, listen, right? He's been telling us for 4 years who he is. So, we can't just cross our fingers and cast our ballot and assume that's going to be it. We got to get out in the streets, win, lose, or draw. Even if there's a landslide, it's still not going to be pretty, right? There's still tactics he's going to employ. You mentioned the Supreme Court, he's undermining the legitimacy of the vote and so forth and so forth. Any underhanded tactic they're going to deploy. And we probably have only seen the tip of the iceberg, right? So, brace yourself for anything, right? So refusefascism.org. Get out in the streets, call others into action. Carl gave us some tips on how to get people off the sidelines. What you guys are doing is critical for the survival of our country. So, I appreciate you for all the work you're doing. Thanks for all the work you've done historically, and everyone at Refuse Fascism. It's been an honor to chat with you. I look forward to talking to you again. We'll get into some of the other stuff. There was a million questions I had through what you said, but I don't want to this stuff. So,
you know how to reach me.
Right on. Cool. Yeah. And thank you anyone for watching. Again, refusefascism.org. Go out this Saturday, find an event near you, create an event near you, sign up to the newsletters, get involved. Don't just sit on the sidelines and wait. We're out of time. We need to be in the streets, right? Turn your fear into fuel. Turn your fear into focus. Let's get out in the streets. It's been a real treat, Carl. I enjoy your work. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. Hopefully we get to talk again soon under, a somewhat normal country state. We'll take a break in February and we'll talk again in March, hopefully, right? If we get him out of there, we need to take a quick breather, but thank you for, like I say, all you do. Anything that we didn't hit on?
For having me on.
Anything we didn't talk about you want to make mention of? Or
I think we covered it. You covered it in the ending thing there.
Right on, brother. Cool.
October 3rd, it begins, and it's going to go day after day after that.
Right on. I'll be in Philly. Carl will be in New York.
In New York.
See you out in the streets. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.